Hello and welcome to my new series, an A to Z of the Ghosts of England. Here we take a haunted tour of the country, county by county, to see what lurks in the darkest corners of the map. In this episode, we take a look at the ghosts of the county of Bedfordshire. The county of Bedfordshire gained its name from the county's town of Bedford that was established in Saxon times, but there is evidence of settlements within the area since the prehistoric era. Originally a rural county whose main economic activity was agricultural, Bedfordshire was located at a crossroads for important trade routes that contributed to the county's growth and development. In the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution brought about a drastic change of the county's economy, with industries such as textiles, brickmaking, and engineering experiencing huge growth at the time, as well as the arrival of railways and the opening of the Grand Canal, encouraging further trade to the area. During both World Wars, military bases and aviation facilities were established in the county, and the town of Bedford became a hub for various military operations. Here are some of the most prevailing ghost stories from the county of Bedfordshire. The Housekeeper. Wardown Park Museum was originally a large Victorian mansion that was built in Wardown Park on the outskirts of Luton Town Centre. The house and park were bought by lime burner Benjamin John Harfield Forder in 1893 and renamed the estate Wardown. In 1903 he sold the house and the park to the Luton Council, and during the First World War the house was used as an army hospital. The house then opened to the public as a museum in 1931. In the 1970s, two engineers were called to the house one night to repair the heating system. They both spotted a woman in a dark dress with a large set of keys on her belt. They followed her as she walked up the back staircase, but she soon vanished into thin air. Spooked, the men asked the caretaker the next day about the woman, and the caretaker confirmed that no one other than the two men were in the house that night. Disembodied footsteps have also been heard coming from this same staircase, but it has never been discovered as to whom the footsteps belonged to. No one knows who the lady was that the men saw that night, but local legend says that it's a Victorian housekeeper who drowned herself due to a failed romance. More recently, the head of the Anglia Paranormal Investigation Society, Damien Odell, recalled from one investigation of the house where he met a lady who had originally grown up in the property. Her father had been the groundsman of the estate, and they had lived in a cottage not far from the house. She told Damien how she had experienced some very spooky encounters while living there, and when she was very young, she had been visited by a very friendly lady wearing a long dark dress who came to her cot. She had accepted that the woman was an employee of the house until she was told when she was older that the woman never existed. Her mum had told her she had also seen the woman, and she was referred to as the housekeeper due to the set of keys she carried on her belt. Cineworld, Bedford. A modern cinema seems like an unlikely place to find a ghost story if you're not there to see the latest horror movie. But the Cineworld in Bedford is believed to be a hotspot for real paranormal activity. While the building itself is new, the grounds on which it was built originally belonged to Newnham Priory, which stood from 1165 until around 1540. The fact that the Priory once occupied this spot would help to explain the fact that both Screen 4 and the cinema toilets are said to be haunted by a ghostly monk. One eyewitness of the hooded figure was a young girl who claimed to see the apparition in the toilet mirror. She was so terrified of what she saw that she locked herself in a cubicle. Screen 4 also has had more paranormal experiences, like the temperature dropping, unexplained scratching noises, and sounds of jangling chains. Customers have also felt hands brushing against their legs while watching a movie. Not only has the apparition been seen and heard, as well as physically touching people, the cleaning staff have also had items thrown at them, such as apples or sweets, and they have been unable to identify who it was that threw them. Thurley Airfield. RAF Thurley's past is filled with tragedy and numerous lives lost, so is it any wonder that it has its own ghost stories to tell? The airfield was built in 1941 and within months had been heavily bombed due to the enemy quickly finding out its location. Also in May 1942, an RAF aircraft crashed at the airfield. Shortly after this, the airfield was handed over to the US Air Force, and it was assigned to the 306th Bombardment Group of the 8th United States Army Air Force. The US Air Force used the airfield to fly their Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses, 4-engined heavy bombers for strategic targets in occupied France and the Low Countries, then later Germany. In November of the same year, an RAF Havoc night fighter crashed, killing the pilot, Sergeant Leonard James Casey. The tragedy didn't end there, as in 1944, poisonous gas spread from the airfield during a training exercise and travelled across into neighbouring fields, causing panic. Also, later in that year, in October, there was a mid-air collision between two flying fortresses where at least 7 people died in the crash. The ghost of an American airman is said to haunt the officers' mess, and an eerie presence felt after a light bulb inexplicably fell from its fitting and landed on a coffee table next to where the witness was sitting. Doors have been seen opening and closing all by themselves, and disembodied footsteps have been heard down the empty corridors. One visitor in the 1990s remembers smelling a full English breakfast being cooked, even though he was standing in the middle of an empty car park. He later found out that the car park had originally been the site of a mess of tents. Policemen who have also patrolled the airfield once looked into an empty hut, only to discover a group of men, dressed in wartime clothing, playing cards. The Hitchhiker of Leighton Buzzard. On the evening of 12th of October 1979, 26-year-old Roy Filton was driving his van home to Dunstable after a darts match in a pub in Leighton Buzzard. While driving along Station Road, he noticed a young man standing on the side of the road, holding out his thumb as a sign that he needed a lift. Roy pulled over, and the young man, dressed in dark trousers, a jumper and a white-coloured shirt, opened the passenger door and got in. When Roy asked him where he wanted to go, all Roy got in return was the young man pointing ahead. The journey continued in silence until Roy decided to offer the young man a cigarette. I leant forward and picked up the packet of cigarettes, turned around to offer the lad one, and that man or boy was not sitting there. Roy immediately stopped his van, turned on the interior lights, and could see there was no sign of his passenger. Ampthill Castle. On the grounds of Ampthill Park once stood a castle. It was built in the early 15th century by Sir John Cornwall, later Lord Fanhope, as a residence meet for his royal spouse, as he had taken as his wife the sister of King Henry IV, Elizabeth. The palace eventually passed down to Henry VIII in 1524, and during their divorce, Catherine of Aragon took up residence there in 1533. By 1555, the palace was already unfit for use and was eventually completely demolished in 1649. The site of the palace is now marked by a cross in memory of Catherine of Aragon, which was erected in 1773. Though the castle may be gone, one of its residents, it seems, still remains on the grounds of Ampthill Castle, now known as Ampthill Great Park. Many witnesses tell of a knight in shining armour that has been seen on horseback departing the site of the castle and disappearing down the hill before he reaches a nearby stream. Other accounts have said he appears as more of a misty figure, with one report coming from a policeman in 1965 seeing a very vague shape of a man riding a horse. The Phantom Horse. A rather random report, but strange nonetheless. A local farmer heard the sound of a horse galloping towards him while he was out walking, although he could not see anything approaching. Moments later, there was a crashing sound in the hedgerow, as if something was running through it, and the farmer felt a blast of cold air, as if of something large rushing past him. Still, there was no sign of anything that could have caused these sounds. Lady Snag. Another story of a ghostly horse and rider. This time the rider is a woman. Lady Elizabeth Snag, who was the wife of Thomas Snag, a Member of Parliament and Attorney General for Ireland, was one day out riding her horse when she was decapitated by a thin rope that had been stretched across the road by thieves as a way to unhorse riders and rob them. Her body had been stripped of all its jewellery and finery, and the robbers fled the scene. She is often sensed or seen repeating her final ride, sometimes with and other times without her head. Do you live in Bedfordshire? Have you ever visited there? If so, do you have any of your own spooky stories to tell? If I can gather enough, I will be doing a special video of local ghost stories from each county, so don't be afraid to send in your own. If you enjoyed this video, then please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. I also have a Patreon account where just for a few dollars a month I will be adding extra stories from my own collection of ghost books that I've not been able to cover in these videos. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I shall see you in the next one.